Well, good morning, everyone. Howdy, folks. Welcome to the January edition of Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, and let me wish you a Happy New Year. This is our first episode of 2024. Really excited about today because we're going to be zooming to some new territory that Cattle Trails Showcase has never been to before. So we're pleased about that. The purpose of the Cattle Trails Showcase is to continually highlight the communities, historical elements, museums, and other attractions along the Chisholm Trail, the Western Trail, and other cattle trails. Showcase is brought to you by the International Chisholm Trail Association, of which Dennis Katzenmeyer is president, Michael Grauer is vice president, Nancy Lawrence is secretary, and Mary Lou Rivers is treasurer. Lonnie Steben is our showcase chair. I'm really excited to be visiting a different part of the country than we've seen before on Cattle Trail Showcase. We're going north to Moorcroft, Wyoming, northeast Wyoming, to the West Texas Trail Museum. It's along a route that, as we've heard through these many episodes, these trails had different names, different times. The Texas Trail, for example, is one we'll see a monument at Moorcroft. The museum is in Moorcroft, as I said, northeast Wyoming, kind of west of the Black Hills area, near a landmark known as Devil's Tower. For sure a sight to see. Cindy Mosteller is director of the museum, which has been rated by True West magazine as one of the top 6 cowboy, cattle, and ranching museums in the United States. Cindy comes from Utah originally. She spent summers on the family ranch in Montana rather, and her and her family came to Wyoming with her husband's job. So Cindy, please tell us about the West Texas Trail Museum in Wyoming.
Well, I would be happy to. I am so happy to be joining you guys today and give you guys a look into something that, it's kind of hard to fathom. I've got a map I'll show you a little later about, why were we bringing this cattle this far north? It seems like 1,700 miles is a long way to bring a trail of beef, but there was some purposes and there was some reasons. We'll get into that, but I am glad to be joining you guys today. You want me to start off the slide presentation now?
You bet. Go ahead and share your screen, and we look forward to it.
I think it's this one. Is that what you're seeing?
Starting and looks great.
All righty. So this is our, I get a lot of compliments on our logo. The board of directors here, they did a fantastic job in 2015 trying to depict, we've got the tower there in the background and our windmills. And if you look real close, these little black critters down here, those are cattle. So let's just jump into it. 30 years is about all we got for bringing cattle north. 1866 was the first documented trail drive through Wyoming. And it was Nelson Story who did that. He was in the Virginia City area in Montana mining, seen the need for beef, and he actually sewed $1,000 into his coat and rode his horse to Texas, bought some cattle, rounded up some new friends, and brought those cattle back to Montana. He did not come through Moorcroft. He actually followed the Bozeman Trail, mostly going from fort to fort for protection, of course, but that was the first documented trail through Wyoming. And of course, they were over by 1898 was the last documented one that come through Moorcroft. We had homesteading and barbed wire fences, and it just wasn't quite as easy to get our cattle all the way up here. So we found alternate routes, mostly rail. But that's how it got started. So obviously, I've watched a couple of your episodes in the past. You guys have all highlighted on every one of these reasons why cattle drives happened. The Civil War influenced them. The stories I'm told, Texas cattle ranchers sold their beef to the South. When the Civil War broke out, of course, the first thing the North did, they took control of that Mississippi River. So now we can't get our cattle sold. So to help with that, the Texas men joined the Confederate Army, with one goal in mind: let's free up that river so we can keep selling our beef. But that obviously did not happen. When they returned home, cattle do what cattle do best when left unattended and made lots of babies. So the number I heard was 5 million cattle estimated in Texas that didn't have homes per se. So what do we do with them? We start to take them to the market demands. The eastern demand and the western expansion had folks coming west, folks going north. At the same time, we're kind of pushing Native Americans onto government in the reservations. So we are filling government contracts. That is one of the biggest reasons they come this far north, was the government contracts for Indians on the Indian reservations. Of course, in doing that, those cattlemen found we have lots of green grass and lots of water and no fences. So we could second homestead up in this area. And it was very lucrative to bring cattle up in the spring, feed them all summer, and put them on the rail cars come fall and make your fortunes. So that's, the biggest drive. Of course, we've all talked about it. I would argue, but Missouri and Kansas there, you guys blamed those Texas cattle into introducing Texas fever. I obviously wasn't there at the time, but I would have thought you had ticks already. So who knows? And then we got homesteading coming. With the Homestead Act, we have folks coming in the area, and they're getting their 160 acres and building a home. But gold has also been discovered in South Dakota, the Deadwood area, and in Montana. They're just north of the Judith Basin, Virginia City area. So we've got miners that need beef. And to expand on that, when the railroads started coming through and gold was discovered in California, we had trails going all the way to California. Of course, they didn't come through Wyoming, but it was a big demand for folks and their beef. And we killed off all the buffalo, so there was really nothing else to eat. This here is a map I have on the wall here. And of course it was painted by a gentleman by the name of Bill Fuller. But he referenced the Western Cattle Trail book the Kreisingers put out. If you've never read it, it's a great information book, but this is kind of his version of those trails. So he's got all the trails marked coming out of Texas. And of course, Moorcroft sits right here in this northeast corner of Wyoming. There was no water per se. Once you got to Cheyenne, you left Cheyenne, headed north, you had the Platte River you had to cross. One of the deadliest rivers, they say, was on the trail route, mostly because dependent on the year and the rain amount, snowpack, it was, the river could be a trickle or it could be 2 miles wide, and there was a bunch of quicksand. So you had to know where you were going. But once you passed over the Platte, you had the Cheyenne River and then nothing until the Belle Fourche River here in Moorcroft. So the river is what the draw was. It was a great place for them to stop, rest a few days, lush grass and lots of water, so they would hang out. That's kind of what got Moorcroft started here. We are missing on this map, so there is a rail spur out of Ogallala here that comes up through the south edge of South Dakota and then cuts across into Wyoming and comes through. It comes up right here and comes through Moorcroft and ends up in Billings. So it's not on the map. That's always been something I'm going to add, but I'm not going to say I'm an artist by any means, and I don't want to ruin the map. So we will just leave it alone. Going into, so let's start a little Moorcroft history. 1878. This upper picture here is a sketch of the town of LaBelle. LaBelle was built right on the banks of the Belle Fourche River. A gentleman by the name of Jake Kaufman. He decided he was going to make a few bucks off some weary cowboys and opened a store, saloon, roadhouse. This town was about 1.5 miles northwest of current Moorcroft. So it was the right along the major crossing point on the Belfouche River at the mouth of Donkey Creek. If you're ever up in the area, it is privately owned, but Judy usually lets us take some people over there if we call and give her enough notice. The ruins of the foundations of the building can still be seen. But during the first couple years, the store also served as a stage stop and a post office. So there was a mail run between Buffalo, Wyoming, and Spearfish, South Dakota, and they would stop in LaBelle. However, the inspector for the post office come through unexpected one time and didn't approve of the way the mail was being handled. Jake, of course, was a gambler and a drinker, and he would just let folks rummage through the pile of mail to get their own mail, and the postmaster inspector didn't think that was too cool. So he relocated the post office stop to the AK Ranch, which was about 2 miles south of where LaBelle was. In 1889, the Chicago Burlington Quincy Railroad decided that it was time to come make their way into South Dakota and Wyoming. And by 1891, they had made it to the Belfouche River. So they laid tracks again about 1.5 miles south of where LaBelle was. And we needed a new name because we were going to be a rail stop for the railroad. And it is said, we don't know where Moorcroft really come from. There's 3 stories. That postmaster inspector was said to be from Moorcroft, Scotland. So he named the town. There was also an early settler in Beulah, Wyoming, which is about 70 miles east, right on the Wyoming, South Dakota line. His last name was Moorcroft. So we don't know what story's true, but they renamed that stop in the rail Moorcroft. And then we have, in a year later, a gentleman from South Dakota by the name of Lou Robinson. He come to town and built the first general store right there next to the railroad tracks for easy on offloading. And within 6 months of Lou building that store, LaBelle had folded up shop and become a ghost town. So town had started building up around the railroad tracks and the store, yeah, as most communities do. But the bottom picture there is a picture of the buildings in Moorcroft in 1902. So by the early 1900s, we had 3 general stores in town, 2 hotels, 2 newspaper offices, 1 bank, a meat market, a post office, a drugstore, a barbershop, pool hall, 1 cafe, 1 novelty store, 1 lumber yard, a grain elevator, a bakery, a flour mill, a creamery, an abstract office, a livery stable, and 5 saloons. So you could tell what was important to those folks back then. But that is Moorcroft's early history. Right now, we're pretty much a population of about 1,000 people. We're pretty much a bedroom community of Gillette, Wyoming. Gillette got big with the oil boom, coal boom. Still the largest coal producing place I hear in the United States. So that's how Gillette made its fortune, and Moorcroft is just a hop, skip, and a jump away. So here's another picture, early Moorcroft, the 2-story white building here. This is Robinson Mercantile. This right here was the livery stable. Every building right here on this street, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but every building is still standing. So that it's kind of impressive a little bit. And then this is 1920 with the rail depot in the background, doing a Flag Day celebration. So, who was coming north this far? The XIT was a large conglomerate ranch owned by English dignitaries out of Texas, but they would stop in Moorcroft on their way to their second home up there by Miles City, Montana. This is a picture from XIT's records, but those were their main stopovers when they were coming up the trail. Lamar, Colorado, and then Lusk, Moorcroft, of course, and then Miles City. This come out of that Western Cattle Trail book of all the cattle's coming north. The XIT, they're the top line, broke out to some of the extent of the cattle they brought up. The 101 Ranch, the Standard Cattle Company Ranch, they were settled here in Moorcroft before they moved to Montana and Nebraska. And then this map, or this total, we have about 1.2 million cattle that come up on the trail. And then an additional 1.2 million cattle that come up on the trail for other purposes. Lou Robinson, who owned that Robinson Merc there in town, he documented every cattle herd that come through Moorcroft. And in 1894, he documented 32 herds and approximately 80,000 cattle. That number's mind-boggling to me. I cannot wrap my head around that. But he's got it wrote down in his ledger. His daughter actually started the museum, so it's interesting to me that his granddaughter, excuse me, she started the museum. So big news, our Texas ties. I don't know how much you guys know about Jeff Driscoll, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. In 1851, he moved from Missouri to Texas. By 57, he's seen the need for beef and started supplying the beef to the Confederate Army and the Texas Rangers. And the Confederate Army is who gave him the honorary title of colonel. He did not serve, but he was bringing them food, so that he thought that was pretty cool that they gave him that honorary title. And he hauled beef during the war and made a fortune. But unfortunately, he was paid in Confederate money, so at the end of the war, he was broke. He still kept in the cattle business after the war, and seeing the need to come north and get cattle on the railheads and get them shipped east and west. So he kept driving cattle, made his fortune back. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but in his family's records, they share that he trailed more cattle than Chisholm himself up the Chisholm Trail. Now, we know Chisholm didn't haul a bunch of cattle up there, but they say Jess Driscoll hauled a large amount of cattle up that Chisholm Trail. In 1868 was his first trip to Wyoming to bring beef to the U.S. Army Indian agents and the Union Pacific Railroad there in Cheyenne. He returned to Texas and sent his two boys back with another load of cattle and continued to bring cattle to Wyoming for the U.S. Army and the railroad. 1869, Jess moves to Austin, Texas, because that's where all of the fun is happening. So he relocates his daughters and his wife, and the boys, of course, are still in the cattle business. Custer comes through on an expedition headed west, comes through the area, and it gets back to Jess that he needs to come further north. So Jess comes up in 1879, up north to the Belle Fourche River, following some buffalo trails, and he started the D Ranch, which would be about a mile, well, probably 10 miles north of where LaBelle was located. So he's not along the river. He's quite a ways north, but he immediately goes home, sends his two boys back. I guess I should tell you their names. William Walter Tobe is what he was known as, and Jess Lincoln Jr. And they brought cattle up and operated that D Ranch in Wyoming, and made a fortune by 1886, which allowed Jess to build the famous Driscoll Hotel in Austin, Texas. So the boys are cattle ranchers here in Wyoming. Dad's at home businessman investing some money in the motel. It opens December 20th, 1886. So during those years of them running cattle here in Wyoming at the D Ranch, it says that they roughly ran cattle from Gillette to the Bear Lodge, which would be the mountain range that the Devil's Tower is on, right at the South Dakota-Wyoming border, and north to Alzada, Montana. So it encompassed quite a few square miles. It is said that although there weren't a lot of people in the area, if it was homesteaded, it belonged to them. But if it was open country, Driscoll cattle were on it. Unfortunately, that winter was the worst winter Wyoming had seen, and the family lost 95% of their stock. They estimated about 65,000 head of cattle, and forced the sale of the Driscoll Hotel in Austin. So he only owned it a year and then had to sell it because he was broke.
Cindy,
Yeah,
Cindy, is the hotel still existing?
absolutely. It is one of the finest hotels in Austin. His brother-in-law bought it from him when he sold it. He owned it for about 10 years, sold it again. It's been sold 7 or 8 times, but they are very good at preserving the history. The whole bottom entryway is all about the Driscoll family and their fortune they made in the cattle markets in Wyoming. And there's some, this large picture of Jess in the foyer of the motel. So this, of course, is Devil's Tower right here. This would be Jess's 8th generation grandson on his horse out there with some longhorn cattle. Of course, the longhorn cattle are more novelty for tourists that are coming to see the tower. They raise Black Angus as a major beef cattle, but yeah,
So
that's
the,
how.
so the Driscoll Hotel is in Austin, Texas, huh?
Austin, Texas. Yep. If you ever get a chance, it is the most beautiful place to go. And it sits right on a corner, takes up a whole city block, both sides. So Jess, we'll go back. Jess died 3 years after losing the hotel. Some say of a broken heart and a broke man. Fortunately, his family, they acquired the Campstool Ranch in 1910 here in Wyoming. It is at the base of Devil's Tower. So that is the current ranch that they are ranching on. They bought it off the courthouse steps from the Mackenzie family, who was wealthy Scottish nobility. And they are still ranching there. Like I said, 8th generation. Ogden is ranching with his son Lincoln. Lincoln's kind of taking control of the ranch, but they are doing rather well. So that brings me to the Shipwheel Ranch, the 101 Ranch. So in 1879, Bartlett Richards, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but his parents sent him to Cheyenne from Vermont for a respiratory disease. And he decided he wanted to be a cowboy while he was here. So he wrote back to his mother and got some money and become a cowboy, bought some cattle, and come north on a cattle drive. Made it to the Belle Fourche River and ended up staying here. He bought the current Shipwheel Ranch, ran it for several years. He managed 3 other ranches around the area, and then decided that he was going to sell it. He was going into other places. And I heard yesterday, so I had an old boy from town tell me that currently lives on the Shipwheel Ranch. He come in and told me that Bartlett Richards had to sell the Shipwheel Ranch to the Standard Cattle Company a few years after the famous Johnson County War, where the cattle vigilantes went and tried to get rid of the sheep herders and accused them of stealing cattle. Well, the Cattlemen's Association required that every ranch send a few hands to help with this, and Bartlett refused to do that. And he was pretty much ran out of town, is what the story was. Now, I don't know how much truth is in that, but that's, what I was told yesterday. So he ended up selling it to the Standard Cattle Company. Unfortunately, that winter of 86, 87 was deadly for the Standard Cattle Company as well. And they ended up selling it to Elias Whitcomb. And it is now owned by the Robinson family. So Lucian Robinson ended up buying it from from Whitcomb several years later, and the Robinson family is still on the 101 ranch. The Williams family owns the Shipwell Ranch at this current moment. So that brings me to Elias Whitcomb. He made his fortune down in the Cheyenne area off of cowboys coming through town, and had a little trading post at Horseshoe Station. He had married an Indian woman and built a home in what is now Fort Collins area. He also had a home in Cheyenne, and he would go back and forth amongst the two. He heard the wonderful stories of the lush grass and the abundance of water, and decided to make a trip up to the Belle Fourche River himself. So at the age of 51, he come north, and he bought some ground and started the Bar FS Ranch, which is just south of Moorcroft. And within a few years, he had purchased the Shipwell Ranch, and then he had started the OR Ranch. He had decided, he had 3 daughters, and he had decided that that's what their inheritance was going to be, was a ranch. And so he got the 3 ranches for his 3 daughters. He had bought another ranch for his son, but his son died from alcoholism at a fairly young age. But Mr. Whitcomb, so he was instrumental in bringing flood irrigation to Moorcroft. Off the Belle Fourche River, he had ditches and dams, which allowed him to be the first in the area to plant alfalfa. He grew luscious hay crops until the drought years of the 30s. He tried to grow fruit trees, but the climate wouldn't support it. Probably because we're, winter time, we're cold. It's currently 10 below. So fruit trees don't survive too well. And the ground was too sandy for grain. So he stuck with alfalfa, concentrated mostly on hay production and improvements to the ranch grasses around. He also raised Clydesdales and standard and Arabian bred horses. But he is most famous for bringing the first Shetland ponies to the States. And he had quite a few Shetland ponies here for his kids to ride on. And despite the gallant snow white beard and the age of nearly being 60 years old, he rode with the vigilante invaders of the Johnson County War and was arrested. So this is a picture of all of those cattlemen. This is him here circled with the big long white beard. They were all arrested, but no charges were filed after they were arrested. They had the governor of the Wyoming territory on their side, and so charges were dropped. This brings me to some interesting reading I have done. So who brought those cattle north? Bob Fudge. I'm sure you guys have heard that name, but he was very instrumental. 16 times come north from Texas to Montana, bringing cattle, come through Moorcroft numerous times. And he tells a couple stories I want to relate to you guys in his autobiography. He said, on a trail drive to Montana, a party of us took a trail of one of those Comanches from after those Comanches that took the kids from the Parker Ranch. I was only 15 at the time, and I got put in charge of all of the horses. There was a large party who had crept up on a hill and discovered a camp of the Indians, but no children were found. We waited 3 days with the help of the search party in hopes to find those children, but we never did. We had cattle to bring north, so we headed back to the cattle. I never did hear if they found that girl or if they didn't. So of course they're talking Cynthia Parker, Juana Parker's mother, who was taken by the Comanches. Bob Fudge was in on that search party. But he also was working for the ICTA, bringing cattle north to Montana. And he said he had about 2,000 steers, and they were headed north. And the Burlington Railroad had just graded a few miles west of the Belle Fourche River that summer, and our cattle were afraid of the grade. We had to put the remuda of horses in front of that herd of cattle to get them to cross that freshly graded dirt. And then years later, he worked for the Cross Ranch up by Broadus, Montana. And he was working for a man by the name of Spencer Biddle, who brought in about 45 head of Scottish Highland cattle. We got them off the rail in Moorcroft and trailed them to the ranch. Within a year, he had 15 head on the ranch. And those Scottish Highland cattle were a wild, woolly bunch. We had about 600 of them in the stockyard in Moorcroft in 1924. When the train come along, blew their whistle, and laughed out their window of the train as all those cattle tore every gate down in that stockyard. The only gate that held was the outside one, and lucky for us it did, for no doubt if we could have ever got them pinned up again. And then we have Teddy Blue. So Teddy Blue, his book, We Trailed Them North. He drove cattle from the Nebraska area north, started about 10 years old. He didn't spend a lot of time in Moorcroft, but he really loved the Deadwood heyday age, and says he was really good friends with Miss Calamity Jane. So that's just a couple of the famous ones that most people know about. I would like to share with you. So this is Lou Robinson, that first general store. This cash register here, the 2 scales, the desk, many other artifacts come from him. But at this time, I would like to share a video with you guys that plays in the museum here about Lou and his store. So hopefully this comes through. Can you see the black screen? Okay. May 16th, 1893. A young man by the name of Lucian H. Robinson, better known as Lou, had just arrived to build the first store in the area. Robinson Mercantile was born in a 12 by 14 wall tent down by the railroad tracks, where he operated his first year. A stick building was raised and expanded several times over the years. In that emporium, the cowboy, rancher, and trail drover could buy anything that was needed, from clothes, food, furniture, feed cake, barbed wire, and knickknacks. When sheep made their appearance in the county around 1900, Robinson shipped in sheep wagons for the new enterprise. By 1909, he started to include machinery and oil field supplies. Robinson Merc became the true one-stop shopping center. Mr. Robinson's second business venture was the cattle business. In 1895, he filed a homestead on 160 acres. Today, the ranch reaches 20,000 acres and is ran by his great-grandson and his family. Lou started the operation with 2 carloads of Durham cows, years later switched to Herefords, and since 1913 has ran purebred Black Angus. The post office was moved to the store in 1896. For 7 years, Lou was the postmaster. 1906 was a big year for us. Mr. Robinson incorporated the Robinson Mercantile, and the town of Moorcroft was also incorporated. In that same year, Lou began his third business venture along with some friends, establishing the Moorcroft Bank. Mr. Robinson passed away on March 7th, 1956, but his legacy still remains on the streets of Moorcroft. In this display, the desk, cash register, and 2 large scales came from the Robinson Mercantile. The cash register, however, lived a great life, and after Lou closed the Mercantile in 1947, it received a second chance at Wild Horse Charlie's, a store up on the hill outside of Moorcroft on Highway 14. The Charlie and Nina Williams family has donated the cash register to the museum. The Robinson family has donated the desk, the 2 scales, and many other Robinson Merc memories. We hope you enjoy. Let me get that presentation back up here. So are we back up? Can we see the storefront there? Okay. So this right here, all right, perfect. This right here is a picture of the outside of our museum here in Moorcroft. We are on a side street, not on the main drag, right off the corner of Highway 14 and Weston Street. You cannot miss us. We take up almost the whole block. But this is the outside of the museum. We are open year round, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I started this year in January. On January 1, I changed the hours from 8 to 4, mostly for selfish reasons. I didn't want to be driving home in the dark. It is dark here by, getting dark at 4 o'clock and dark by 4:30. So in April, I'll go back to 9 to 5. We are open on Saturdays from Memorial Day to Labor Day. I am also available almost any other time of the day. If you're driving through town and you really want to stop, but we are closed, call me. I don't have any problems hanging out. All the kids are grown. My husband doesn't care if I'm home or not. You know how it goes. Give me a holler. I will gladly come in and open up the museum for you to come check out. So as Ron said earlier, we do have a monument, and the trail has been called several things: the Texas Trail, the West Texas Trail, the Lone Texas Trail. We've heard a little bit of everything, but this is a monument that is at the rest area just outside of town here. And as you can see, the first brands down here on this, the XIT, the D from the Driscoll Ranch, the 101 from the 101 Ranch. The ship wheel is underneath that. Here looks like sun, kind of. That monument is available to see 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The biggest draw to the museum, and this is probably going to shock you, we have a two-bodied conjoined calf set. So I talked to Ron and Lonnie yesterday, and they said, hey, if you can include a picture of that, that would be great. So here they are. They were born in 2018. And they had two of everything other than that one hip they share, and of course the hind leg of that. So they've got 6 legs, but they had 2 separate hearts, lungs, stomachs, respiratory, I mean everything. The 2 tails, it's quite a phenomenon. I've seen a couple 2-headed ones, but I've never seen this fully developed, just not completely separated calves before. So that is our biggest draw. People come in the front door and have a picture of it that they've seen online somewhere, and they want to check out these calves. So I, of course, strategically place them in the back of the museum, so you have to go through the museum to get to them, but it's kind of fun. But to wrap up, why we did this. It was a dream of any cowboy to make it up to that Yellowstone Judith Basin area. It was so beautiful. Cowboys either rode their horse back to Texas, or they sold their saddle and got on the train, bought another horse and a saddle when they got back to Texas. Most of the cattle drives ended at railroad terminals. That was the end goal, was to get them on the train and get them shipped somewhere. The XIT come up a couple times a year. They would usually trail up about every 2 months. Cattle, of course, being traded in Ogallala and Cheyenne. And then after 1980, most of the cattle were transported by rail to what they call their finishing ranges. Lots of grass, lots of water. We can put some poundage on those critters and then ship them before they get them off to market. So this is some information. This is where I got most of the information we have is these. There's silver on the sea. These books and these family histories. So if you have a chance or an opportunity, then I highly recommend reading all of them or any of them. But that's what brought cattle to Moorcroft. So I hope.
Cindy, before
Thank you,
you
Cindy.
before we go into questions, you might explain your end goal there with the museum that you talked about with an outdoor facility. Hopefully.
Oh, yeah. So, where the museum currently sits, there was some vacant lots behind. There is a house in between us and those vacant lots. We have purchased those vacant lots in 2023. With the goal of purchasing that house. They're being a little stubborn and they don't quite want to give it up. It hasn't been lived in for, well, since I moved here in 2012. And it's starting to fall down. It's starting to show its age. So we're hoping we can get that bought with the ultimate goal. I want to build an outdoor museum. I want you to be able to experience Moorcroft in the early 1800s like it was when the cattle were coming through, with a schoolhouse and a saloon and a livery stable and a carriage house. Couple selfish reasons. I would like to get some of that larger equipment. We've got a couple buggies in the building. I would like to get them out so I have room to put other stuff. It's just selfish reasons. But I think it would be a great addition to the community and to be able to tell our story of how we're coming and things. Of course, we're funded mostly, a county district board runs us. They are funded by a mill levy, so our taxpayers help pay for our building and my salary. And then all of my exhibits and all of my projects are funded through donations and grants. So we are free to attend. I had a suggestion yesterday to charge a little bit. It might make it the appearance of it being worth stopping at a little more appealing if we charged a little. Not sure how I feel about that, but we are just a great little stop when you're getting off I-90. So if you're traveling I-90 from Yellowstone to the Black Hills or vice versa, Moorcroft is exit 154. You cannot miss us on I-90. And I am just a mile from the exit. And then if you're going on to Devil's Tower, you have to drive right past us. So I really encourage you to stop if you're ever up in this area.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Outstanding
welcome.
presentation. I'm gonna give you a virtual round of applause here for the moment. We have just a few minutes for questions, and Jean Chavez asks Cindy, are there any accounts that describe the Texas Vaquero? So the Spanish Cowboys. Were there many of those who made that trip north?
There's not very much documentation about that. I know that's how it all got started. Let's be real. That's where the cowboy come from. But I don't have any stories or any documentation of any of them coming this far north.
That's
Gene,
an
do
area
you
we're
know-
going to explore further. So we look forward to that. Tom Hawk has a question. Tom?
Yeah, I strongly recommend you reading the Crazinger books on the Western Cattle Trail. They were at the core of assembling my trip in May, in terms of going from Dillon's Crossing all the way to Ogallala and then to Cheyenne. Just for your information, when I got to Ogallala, I couldn't find anybody there who knew about, in the visitor center, who knew about the Western Cattle Trail, or that
That's unfortunate.
or that this year is going to be the 150th anniversary of the beginning of the Western Cattle Trail, and I was very surprised at that. The last thing I want to say is, since I'm a performer, I wonder if you ever have any performers come to the museum.
I do actually. We so there's a couple yearly events that we hold. We have a town celebration in the second weekend of July. Jubilee Days is what we call it. It started to celebrate the centennial of Wyoming statehood, and Moorcroft has just continued that celebration every year. I actually serve breakfast that Saturday morning, second Saturday of July. Pancakes, sausage, eggs here at the museum. It costs you nothing. Come hang out with me, eat some breakfast, and then enjoy the parade and the rest of the festivities. I have been known to bring people into town, presentators and things for that. Anymore, the schedule's getting so jam-packed with stuff that it's really hard to compete with other events going on that the town's doing. So I back off a little bit, but that second weekend of September, we have a heritage roundup here at the museum. We pitchfork steak fondue, steaks, baked potatoes, the whole shebang. And I usually have a band come in. We close down the street. We have an old-fashioned street dance by street lights and have a good time.
Great fun. Great fun. Well, that's outstanding. Folks, we're going to be at our time boundary shortly, but let's give Cindy a round of applause for a really interesting and informative presentation. I know I learned a lot this morning. Lonnie Steben, what do we have coming up next on next month's Cattle Trails Showcase?
Well, I think actually one of our viewers has volunteered for us. You know, sometimes we have to twist arms, but Gene, we really appreciate Gene Chavez will be talking about his depth of knowledge, and it is deep, of the vaqueros, and we're looking forward to that next month. So
thank you. I look forward to it.
We appreciate it, Gene.
thank you.
So our next episode will be Friday, February 9, 2024. Thanks again, Cindy, for a fascinating presentation. To close our program today, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place, and come on back next month for our Cattle Trails Showcase. Happy trails, everyone.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yes.
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something as well.
Very
It
informative.
was great.